Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the centre of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honoured that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
People don't necessarily have to support the idea that you've come up with, but if you can get them to talk about why they don't like the idea, you can identify so many things that you can do. So, for example, when I spoke to the cafes about why they wouldn't take my beaten up, old plastic container, I learnt that they had those regulations, that their requirements were to ensure that they were putting their food into something clean. What they're actually saying is they can't accept this, but what they could accept is something that looks a little bit different or operates a bit differently. So, talking to people and making sure you're really listening and you're hearing their real issues, not just that they maybe don't support it or that they don't like it or even that they do like it. Listen to the underlying things that people are saying, because that's often where the gold is.
Welcome back. I hope you've had an awesome week to date. If you haven't yet listened to my recent conversations with Jonathan Callanan of Online Business Accelerator and with author, speaker and leadership mentor Eric Rogel, then do check them out. Don't forget, but listen in to today's conversation first, because today I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest, Veronica Shannon. Veronica is a lawyer, an entrepreneur, a published author, and a sustainability leader. She founded Retub, the company that produces the premium reusable takeaway food container that has a built-in container exchange program. And she also has founded other businesses that have purpose and innovation at their heart. In our discussion today, Veronica talked to me about what drove her to start Retub and how she tested and refined the idea. How she engaged all stakeholders, not just customers, in the development of the Retub product. And we talked about the importance of feedback and being open to and learning from that feedback. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Veronica Shannon. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from relatively close by compared to our last guest who was way over in the US. From Melbourne, Australia, Veronica Shannon, who's the founder and CEO of Retub. Retub is an interesting company that produces reusable takeaway containers for people to buy food in. So welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Veronica. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you. I'm privileged to be here.
Sonia Zebek, who was our guest on episode 344 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, Sonia from Papillon, she introduced us and suggested that we have a conversation with you. So a big hello to Sonia.
Yes, hi Sonia. Yeah, she's doing incredible things with Papillon.
Yes, she is, and I'm excited. I'm having a coffee with her next week, actually, so excited to catch up on where she's at. Now, before we start talking about all things Retub and finding out a little bit more about that business, what is it that drives you, Veronica, and how does that shape what you're doing today?
Well, I guess I'm driven by having a bit of purpose. I guess legacy is my biggest driver. I wanted to do something bigger than just just live on this planet. I want to leave something behind and feel like I've contributed to society. And I think that that's a major driver in what helped me to create Retub. And I think it's a driver for a lot of things in my life outside of business as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a conversation on the last episode, and it should be the last one to publish today, and we were talking about legacy in regards to the whole leadership journey. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we're all kind of reflecting on that now. How do we leave this place better than when we came in, and what can we do to actually make a contribution? So tell us a little bit then, what exactly is Retub? What is the benefit to society that you see it providing?
So, as you said, Retub is a reusable takeaway food container, and it's got a container exchange program that's built into the design. And the idea is that part of the legacy, I guess, is that I want to be really drastically reducing waste in a really easy and practical way. But the container exchange concept has always been part of the design because I wanted it to be something that was easy and hygienic for consumers as well as the cafes that will have to buy into this. And cafes generally, they want to reduce waste. They don't know how. So if we can have them having their customers come in and show them an option that they love, and the cafes want to embrace, it just makes life much easier. It means that we get momentum building with this waste reduction initiative.
All right. The container exchange program, I'm curious about that model. So how does that work? So my understanding is that you buy your own unique Retub container and there's a shell inside that, which is the exchange part.
Yeah, that's right. So exactly that. There's a glass in a container. So one thing, we're also very mindful of the materials that we use. We make things that can be reused for a really long time. So there's a glass, borosilicate glass in a container, and that's got a silicone lid, and then there's an outer case that provides thermoprotective qualities. That the base can come in different colours, and so can the lid, and so can the vent. So everything can be sort of personalised and customised for consumers to fall in love with their product. And that's important because pride in the product means that people want to use it more, and that's obviously essential when we want people to reuse. But as you said, the container exchange program is focused on swapping out the inner container, which is identical. So that's the bit that doesn't change colour. It's always a glass inner container. But it's either medium or large at the moment. And the cafes can have those extra inner containers on hand. They make sure that they're always clean. And when a customer comes in, let's say I got bircher muesli for breakfast and I want a salad for lunch, but I forgot to rinse it in between, I can go to a participating cafe, and instead of taking up their time by forcing them to wash my unclean inner container, they can just swap it and give me a clean one and immediately put their salad into something that they know is really clean as well. And then they can take my inner container and wash it when it suits them, not in their busiest lunch hours as well. That said, that's the traditional model of Reswap, the container exchange program. But we actually work with cafes to make the container exchange program work best for them. So that's the traditional model, but we've also got a deposit model where they can actually work with customers who want to effectively rent out their a Retub while they have lunch and then bring it back at a later stage that day or the next day. So we work with them on options that they can use for that. And we also have a full reswap. So in some businesses, for example, where they've only bought one colour combination, and all staff have, let's say, a blue Retub, they can arrange for their internal cafes in the cafeterias to swap a Retub for a Retub, and no one misses out because they always look identical. And that's another system that we help cafes to set up if they think that will work best. And the idea is we want to help the cafes use the best system for their particular cafe and for their customers. And so there's flexibility in our design.
Yeah, what I like about the whole model is you've said, hey, there's a user, but there's also the provider of the food, essentially, as a key partner in this thing. So it's got to have everybody bought in to make it work. So how did you come onto the idea, first of all, of Retub? That's the first question, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that was I used to work in a really busy job, and I'd do really long hours, and I was often eating my breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the office, which is a bit of a sad story for me. But one thing I noticed was that I was personally filling up my rubbish bin that sat under my desk, and I was filling it up every single day, and it was predominantly with single-use food containers. And at first I thought that was just me, and that it was because I was working long hours. And then this one night in particular, I did a walk around the office after most people had left, and I noticed that everyone's rubbish bins under their desks were full, and it was the same culprits. It was always the sushi single-use container shell, or a paper bag that someone had bought, a sausage roll in or something like that. And it just occurred to me that what was really missing was a reusable takeaway food container. And at that time, I already was going out of my way to make sure I had my reusable cup with me at the office as well as one at home, had a reusable water bottle, had a shopping bag handy in case I needed impromptu shop. And I sort of had quite a good or decent reuse repertoire, and I was missing out on reducing waste because this thing was missing in my life, and that was what I created in the Retub. So that's how Retub was born. I just identified a problem, realised that it wasn't a problem unique to me, but that it was a problem that others clearly had as well, and then went about trying to find the best solution, which wasn't quite as easy as I'd hoped. I actually initially thought, oh, well, this is easy. I'll just bring in an old beaten up Tupperware container that I had at home, and I would ask the cafes downstairs to just, put my noodles or my sushi or whatever it was that I was buying into that beaten up plastic container. And they flat out refused to. And that was an interesting and fantastic process, because the problem was, I had this container for a long time, and over the years I'd sort of used cutlery and put little dents in it, and had tomato-based sauces, and they discoloured it. And the feedback from the cafes was that even though I knew it was clean, they couldn't tell that it was clean because, over the years of use and having curries and tomato-based sauces in this plastic container, it had discoloured over time and had dents and just looked a little bit old and stained. And their concern was that they had obligations to make sure that they were using a clean container for the food that they put for the container that they put their food in. And so that really guided me to glass as a really good option, so that the cafes could, on a visual check, make sure that they were using something that was clean. And also as a consumer, I actually much prefer eating out of glass than I do plastic as well. So all these things sort of started to influence it. And I think that's a major part of innovation, is to identify whose problem it is. And, I identified that it wasn't just the problem for the consumer, it was also a problem for the cafe. And then think about how to provide a solution that benefits all of those stakeholders, if you will. And then, when you come up with some ideas, to test it again, and just keep going and asking all the different people who you identify as the stakeholders. I'd ask them for feedback and ask them for their thoughts. And at the time, absolutely no one was doing reusable takeaway food containers. And it was a really interesting process because, as I said, there was pushback from cafes. Cafes were concerned about hygiene, so that influenced why I wanted a container exchange program built in, that influenced the choice of materials. I think just reaching out to a lot of people can really help to work out what the solution needs to be.
It's fascinating. So you talked to a lot of cafes then in the early days when you were wanting to start using that container that you already had.
Yeah, and I guess in the really early days, I wasn't looking to create a business. I was actually looking to solve my own problem. I realised that I wasn't alone in having the problem pretty early on, but initially it was as organic and as authentic as just realising that I really wanted to not have as much rubbish in my bin, and that the big culprit was takeaway food containers, and and then I went about just trying to find a solution that worked for me, but also for the cafes that I had to rely on. If they didn't want to use my container, they wouldn't. So it became something about solving the issue for me and for them.
All right. And how did you go about then building kind of that initial cohort of, first of all, cafes, but then also people that bought the food, who would form the core of the Retub community that essentially got the product off the ground?
So we don't actually we don't tend to contact the cafes ourselves. We make that a consumer-driven process. So we get the consumers who love the look of the product. Often it is just that they like the look of it. They think it looks great. And sometimes our consumers are not particularly driven by the waste reduction initiative. Sometimes they absolutely are, but sometimes it's just that they love this product. So we get people on board. I was working in the corporate world, so I had a lot of corporate contacts and businesses that wanted to buy these for their staff, for staff onboarding gifts, or for just marketing gifts, because they can co-brand and have people walking out to cafes within the CBD, with their company brand, sort of advertising the company and showing off their sustainability credentials. So that's how we initially got started. It was a lot of corporate and council support, big businesses helping to get them to quite a number of consumers. And then the consumers, as I said, they drove the cafes to get involved. So they would then have them and they would go to their local cafe, whether it was at home or the office, and they'd start asking their local cafe if they would accept it. And so our website map has some cafes. So, for example, the cafes that I first went and spoke to, they were on De Grey Street in Melbourne, and a lot of those cafes are so small that they don't have kitchens. So some of those came on as just Retub acceptors, and then some of them, if they had kitchens and they could wash up, they wanted to be part of the container exchange program, but not all of them necessarily are. So some of the cafes we work with, do accept reswap and some of them don't. But it's generally driven by their customers, because cafes do want to reduce waste. Most cafes really recognise that they are contributing a lot to of waste by the nature of what they're doing, and they're really looking for ways to support waste reduction. And if their consumers and their customers come in and basically tell them, this is how I'm doing it and I want you to do this too, it really is a compelling argument, and it's a great way to get the cafes to support us too.
Yeah, I love the approach you've taken there, and it's kind of basically identified the niche based on your own need and then created that niche around the knowledge that other people have that need as well, and that the cafes that provide the takeaway food in the main probably are very concerned about the amount of waste that they're producing and contributing to. So, bringing them on board as well.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more of an issue these days. I think more and more cafes are aware of it, and the reusable cup movement really got people and cafes thinking about waste from that specific niche, and then it's sort of just naturally expanded over time into other areas. But yeah, in the main, cafes are, they really are trying to be extremely responsible while running a business, often with low margins, and their business can be very demanding. So I think in the main they are doing really good things and really trying hard, and they're able to make such a massive difference in this space, waste as well.
And I think there's a huge opportunity here. You talked about leaving a legacy earlier to make a difference. I mean, I think back to when I was a child and going shopping with my mother when I was very young. We used to go to what was then called health food stores, and one of the attractions for my mother, I mean, there were two key attractions really. One was that you brought your own container, and basically you bought whatever it was. It might have been rice, or it might have been noodles or sugar, and you put it in your own container. You brought your own container, and so there was no packaging produced separately. And the other attraction, of course, was you could buy any quantity, so you didn't have to buy a kilogram or half a kilogram or something. You bought what you needed. You just filled up your container or half filled it, whatever it was.
Love it.
But that's kind of died off, hasn't it, that whole thing? And one of the things that frustrates me, you go into the supermarket, not only are packaged goods using all these single-use packages, there's also, I had some fish for lunch today, so I have to put my hand up to say I contributed. So the fish was in tin. It was tinned fish, and then there was a cellophane wrap around the tin, presumably because they didn't trust the tin itself or the can itself to be sealed properly. I don't know. And then outside of that was a cardboard box, which was there simply for the purpose of branding and having the brand name on there. And I thought, what a lot of wasted stuff. I mean, it just needed one container.
Absolutely. And it's so funny because my mum will talk about when she used to get takeaway food as a kid, they would go to a local Chinese shop and bring their own pot or pan, and that would be what got filled up, and then they'd go home with that. And your example of the health food shop where you buy what you need, these things, it's actually kind of strange that we moved away from those options, because they make so much sense. Even now, if you live in a city, maybe you have a small place and a small kitchen, and you don't need a kilo of rice, or you don't have the space to store a kilo of rice, but having 2 cups might be the sort of amount that you want to have in your pantry, and there are more and more of these bulk food shops, and there are more and more places that are really trying to reduce packaging, outside of the takeaway perspective, but just more broadly looking at shopping and looking at a whole range of things that can be done differently. And but yeah, the point you make, a lot of these things were available to us, and somehow we got it in our heads that convenience could be so wasteful. It's a bizarre concept that we've all bought into it at some stage, because this is how society has gone, and now we've got to do a bit of I guess undoing a bit of our thinking about what convenience actually looks like, and how convenient things need to actually be when they are destroying the planet. Yeah, so, and that's a design challenge, and that's a point of exciting innovation, because having things where you make it better than the status quo, that's the ultimate, that's the challenge. Making it something that's easy and desirable, something that people want to do. That's where we can start designing out all these wasteful aspects of packaging, or whatever the case is. Yeah, and that's the exciting bit for someone who loves innovation and who loves business as well. It's, times are calling for it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing around that, and particularly in this arena, is that it's not necessary to have some sort of high-tech new development that we don't have available to us yet. Like, if you think back 20 years, we didn't have mobile phones or smartphones, and now we've got smartphones, so we can do all these cool things with smartphones that we couldn't do 20 years ago. It's really
catch videos.
Yeah, it's really about thinking back to first principles and saying, well, actually, there were times when we did stuff like this in a different era. Now what do we have today that's available to us where we could make what we did then more convenient than the throwaway single-use packaging?
Absolutely. I think that's so spot on, that innovation doesn't have to be high-tech. And in some cases, the more simple, the better. And often going back to just how things were done before, I sort of get a feel that maybe the 80s were a big change in society, where things became very much convenience-based. And having a look at how we were doing convenient things, in really recent times, that, it can just be about going back to the basics. And I agree. I think that's another exciting thing as well. We don't need to wait for new technologies that we can't even imagine will exist. We don't have to wait for that. We can do something now, and we can make it really great, a great experience for everyone.
Yeah, I love it. Because you mentioned De Grave Street, and for those people that don't know Melbourne, De Grave Street is one of those streets where there's wall-to-wall restaurants, and it's pretty much a pedestrian zone, as I remember it. I haven't been there for a couple of years, but it's pretty much a pedestrian zone. And when the sun's shining and pre-COVID days, there would be people sitting on the sidewalks having a great time, eating food. And of course, most of the cafes and restaurants do takeaway as well. So a lot of the office workers that work pretty hard like you would grab their food and take it back to the office. Of course, a lot of that dried up over COVID when the hardly any office workers were in the central city area because they were working from home, and many of the restaurants shut down, although obviously they tried to focus on their takeaway business. How did that impact your business with Retub?
Well, because our business is mostly a business to business, so we usually work with companies and then get to their staff via their HR teams or their marketing teams. What changed was the focus of our conversation. So we didn't pivot as much as some businesses where we didn't change our business. We were still selling the same product, but we started to sell it in a different way. And our focus was not so much on takeaway food as much as it was on people utilising their retubs for meal preparation at home, and looking at some of the features that we've built in, because we've got things like measurement lines. They've always been there, but it helps people to keep track of how much they're eating, and a lot of people, put on the COVID kilos, as they referred to them. And this was just, a way to make sure that people were aware of how much they were eating. We then talked about other properties, like how it's easy to microwave. That base, the outer base doesn't, there's a double wall that's created, so that outer base stays cooler than the inner base when you reheat food in the microwave. So that was another feature that we could help people to prepare their food in advance, have leftovers, reheat their leftovers without burning their fingers, cook food immediately in the glass in the oven. So we just started to we used what we've had, and we just sort of marketed some of the other features, which are features that people love, but it's not generally the focus when we talk about Retubs being a reusable takeaway food container. And what we found was that a lot of companies were happy to support their staff during that time to get a retub. And then as they've slowly returned to the office, the marketing has changed again, because now the focus is on actually keeping your retub when you're at work, so that you're not sharing crockery. And that's helping some businesses with making sure that their workplaces are really hygienic, because they've got COVID plans, return to work plans, that they need to make sure that they're looking at all these hygiene risks in the office. So again, the marketing, the product is the same product, but we sort of pivoted our marketing and what features we're going to focus on in order to change with the huge change that was COVID. During COVID, there was actually a shift away during the first lockdowns. But we're based in Melbourne, so we had really extensive lockdowns. But the first round of lockdowns, there was generally a shift away from reusables, while people were still trying to understand, the virus and how it was spread, and whether it was something that you had to be fearful of when it came to reusable products, but reusable cafe products. And of course, scientists from around the globe came out in support of reusables. So we started seeing a lot of cafes accepting reusables and really enjoying that there was the ability to swap either the entire container or that inner container as part of their way of balancing hygiene within their own cafes. So that was another really interesting thing that came out of COVID as well, just how people started to use that container exchange program in different ways, and sometimes in multiple different ways, depending on how each staff member wanted to deal with it. So someone on a morning shift might deal with it differently to someone on in the afternoon, and the cafes wanted to support their staff as well as their customers. Yeah, so it was a really interesting time, and pivoting during such an interesting time was mostly for us, it was just about communicating different features and communicating how the product could be used in different ways.
Yeah, it's fascinating that obviously the design is so good that whilst you had in mind a specific problem to solve early on, as the product evolved, there were so many other benefits that made it applicable in a variety of situations, such as warming up food in the microwave and still being able to grab the outer container without burning your fingers, or freezing. I think they can go in the freezer as well without any issue. So lots of different things, and I like that you said, well, we refocused the marketing message to highlight some of the other applications. So yes, the primary intent was as a reusable takeaway container, but there's a whole lot more you can do with it.
Yeah, and the beauty is once people have it, then it's there to use as a reusable takeaway food container when they're ready. But the fact that we had built in all these things were done with takeaway in mind. I should note that the internal measurement lines were about making sure that when a cafe is, charging you $10 for the medium curry of the day, that and they know that they've given you the same volume as their single-use container would hold as well. So that was something that we built into the design, not thinking that people are thinking about portion control as such, but it was more about making sure that cafes and consumers had confidence that volume can be deceptive. Certain containers can look like they hold less, but they actually hold more. Anyone who's had a cocktail knows that as well. Cocktail glasses can also be deceptive, but so all these things, all the aspects, the reheating in the microwave was because a lot of people in business meetings will get called into a meeting after they've bought their lunch, and they don't get an opportunity to eat their lunch while it's hot. So that was designed with that takeaway in mind, that so often people need to zap it and just reheat it after they've had a impromptu meeting. But yeah, as you said, all these features happen to be really helpful to be able to pivot our messaging and our marketing. And these are things that make it more attractive in general, but you don't necessarily get the opportunity to focus on those features without confusing people if you're only talking about takeaway. So it was actually a real opportunity to show off other features and really highlight those and bring those to the forefront for a while as well.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, I mean, we could go on talking Retub for ages and all the different things, but I'm sort of really keen to bring out how you went from the idea to developing the product and then working with all the stakeholders as you described and getting it off the ground, and also the pivoting, fascinating how you were really clear, hey, all these benefits can help with other situations. So take the product and put it in a different environment. So the COVID environment now, where people perhaps are not going out to the takeaway restaurants as much, although there's still a lot of takeaway going on, but in a different context. But there's all these other benefits that are valuable in different environments. So I love that you've pivoted the marketing and the message and the focus of the message, keeping the focus really clear to match what people are looking for at the time.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, COVID, and it's actually been, I think for businesses, it's probably given a lot of businesses an opportunity to sort of step back and observe, and you don't often get that opportunity in business. And I think there are some really fantastic aspects that COVID, obviously it was a really tough time for a lot of businesses, and reusables were actually, it was a really tough time for reusables there prior to the scientists coming out in support of reusables. But it really was an opportunity as well to look at it and to look at different ways. And these changes to our marketing, these are things that we'll take with us, and we'll continue to spruik these features, knowing that these are things that people love as well. So, so there were a lot of really big positives to come out of a challenge like COVID.
All right. Well, thanks, Veronica. I think it's a good point now to move on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience, who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field, with some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions, and hopefully your answers will inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today as a result.
Fantastic.
So what do you think the number one thing is that anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I think the number one thing is to look at the problems that are in your life. So, the best innovation is about solving a real problem, not looking for something that's too obscure. But if you can look to your own life to identify something that needs a solution, then you're on a good track, because chances are if it's a problem for you, it's a problem for others. and then that's the next point of inquiry. Is this something that is unique to me, or is this something that I can see that other people need solved as well? So I think it's about keeping it as close to an actual problem. A lot of people go off on tangents that aren't solving an issue. So that was my number one suggestion. Make sure it's a problem that's close to home, and then test it amongst others that to see if it's a problem they share.
Yeah, I love it. And one of the things I always ask myself, when I strike a problem and I'm looking for a solution on the internet, I thought surely somebody else has had this problem as well. And I've got to come to realize now, if I don't find a solution that I'm looking for, or a solution that I'm happy with, that I'm quite happy to go out and try and figure out a solution and develop something. But then what I've come to realize is I've got to ask that question again and say, well, surely other people have had this problem too, and can I solve it for them too? Which is essentially what you've done with Retub, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
The absolute best thing is to talk to people, share my ideas and thoughts, and really listen. People don't necessarily have to support the idea that you've come up with, but if you can get them to talk about why they don't like the idea, you can identify so many things that you can do. So, for example, when I spoke to the cafes about why they wouldn't take my beaten up, old plastic container, I learnt that they had those regulations, that their requirements were to ensure that they were putting their food into something clean. That was coming out of them rejecting my then solution for them. But through listening to what their real problem was, I could then tweak the design and work out, okay, so what they're actually saying is they can't accept this, but what they could accept is something that looks a little bit different or operates a bit differently. So, talking to people and making sure you're really listening and you're hearing their real issues, not just what they're not just that they maybe don't support it, or that they don't like it, or even that they do like it. Listen to the underlying things that people are saying, because that's often where the gold is.
Yeah, I think the listening part is really important there, and detaching a little bit from your ego, because sometimes, like, your first solution wasn't something you developed, it was just something you thought, okay, this will do the job. But when you got to the point of, okay, I've designed something and I've developed something, then you're kind of attached to that, and there's an ego bit involved. And if somebody says, no, that's no good, there's still missing these bits and pieces, then you've got to be prepared to take that feedback on board, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. I think that a lot of people, when they come up with something that's a little bit different, or that they haven't seen anything like it on the market, they can make the mistake of not talking to people because they want to be cagey and they want to hold on to this idea and this concept. And I think that that's where it's a missed opportunity to learn and to keep improving on something. I think, the reality is not, I think as a proportion of society, there aren't that many people who will actively go and actually create something. So you're a fairly good chance of going away and talking to people, and they won't copy it, but they will give you some really interesting feedback that can just help you to improve on that solution again and again.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, and do you have a favourite resource that you use most often?
No, I don't actually. My favourite thing, really, the favourite resource, if you can even call it that, is actually just friends, family, colleagues. It is that thing about going back and talking to people and prototyping as much as you can based on feedback. But there's no specific resource or tool that I use. I think, creativity is something that I think it will come out in so many different ways. But yeah, talking about it, showing people prototypes and getting feedback is the resource that I would use.
Yeah, so
if I may.
Lots of conversations and listening, like you said earlier.
A lot of listening, and not letting ego make it so that you're just telling people, really listening and getting that feedback, because I think we can all fall into the trap of thinking, oh, nailed it, I've got this neat, beautiful solution, and you want to tell everyone how it works and how it's going to help them, but particularly in the early days, you really have to listen. That's it, yeah.
All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a project like this on track?
For us, we I guess we knew what the problem was. We reached out for assistance to get the ideas sort of settled and get an idea of what the solution needed to look like. For us, getting it on track was really about giving ourselves some time frames that we wanted to work towards, and just constantly checking in. So it was just making sure that, in any business, they say that you want to fail fast. And I do think that that's actually, that's a reality of business, that if a product or an idea is not going to work either at all or in that current state, you want to get that feedback as quickly as you can. And so for us, it's really about keeping time frames and checking in and having goals that you're working towards, and constantly making sure that you're doing things as quickly as possible. And failing is a bit of a misnomer, because sometimes it is about putting something in front of a cafe and getting that feedback, and that doesn't mean it's the end of the story. It's just that feedback that you then go, okay, that's not the track that we want to be on. We want to shift it up, and then you keep moving quite quickly. But that would be timeframes and quick actions. Forcing yourself to work as quickly as possible is what I would suggest.
Yeah, that's great. Timeframes and regular check-ins, and I particularly like the idea of failing quickly, but treating failure as feedback. My business coach always reminds me that there's no such thing as failure; it's all feedback.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think we almost need to get rid of the word, or find a different word.
All right. Now, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
I think that you look at your competitors and or places that could be competing. Maybe they're not quite in your niche, but they're doing something similar, and not look to them so that you can work out necessarily what they're doing right. I know a lot of people do that, but I think look to your competitors to see what it is that, when you look at their product or their service, what you wish they were offering, what they haven't quite nailed, because that is how you want to differentiate. That's the sweet spot. That's what you want to focus your attention on. For us, we didn't have any competitors when we came out. We were the first in our niche, and we looked to other products that were similar, so other reusable sorts of products, and looked at the problems that we had, and as well as the things that we loved, and that really helped to sort of guide us.
Yeah, I love that. And somebody said to me once that a really good source of inspiration along those lines is check out product reviews of your competitors, and look at the negative reviews where people have said, this is good, we like this, but this is no good or missing, or wish we had that. And but that's a kind of potential source of stuff there, and say, well, if we can deliver all of that stuff as well as do the rest of it equally well or better, then we've got something different and better.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, totally agree.
All right. Well, thanks, Veronica. This has been fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about Retub and maybe get in touch with you to say thanks for what you shared with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Instagram is probably our favourite social media channel, and we've always got someone on that will be able to sort of answer any DMs. So if you've got any questions, have a look at us at Retub Official on Instagram, and and we'd love people asking us questions. We're also really interested in building a community of people who are sustainability conscious. So we've also got other forums. So on Facebook, we've got pages. We've got community pages that are linked to our Facebook page as well. So we're happy to sort of engage on every level when it comes to sustainability. And that's the easiest way to reach us, Instagram, otherwise the Facebook groups.
All right, we'll post links to those in the show notes so people can access them real quickly, yeah. Now, do you have some parting advice for our listener today, Veronica?
I think my parting advice is probably something that I've already said, but when it comes to innovation, I really think that people just need to focus on the problems and the bugbears that they've got in their own lives, and then talk about it, and talk about it with friends, family, colleagues, as many people as possible, and without ego, be there to listen and to pick up on all the issues people have a look at your competitors, and read up on those reviews, as you said, to see what other people wish were part of that solution. And that should really help guide innovation that's also going to be the sound business model as well.
That's great. And there's a theme throughout that. I was looking back to, I kind of have this page layout where I write some things down on the left and then some things on the right. And I was going back, I've got to add feedback to the left-hand side because that keeps coming up. And then I realised I'd already written it down there. So this idea of getting feedback and listening to people is an ongoing theme right throughout.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, great, Veronica. Now, finally, who else should I get on this show and why?
So many people. I think, the pivoting and the creation that came from pivoting and doing business in different ways is something that's really inspiring for all of us business owners. And so I would recommend Danielle Goodwin from Hawkeye Vintage, which does beautiful vintage clothing, but they sell things in quite a different way. And they got really creative over COVID. So my recommendation would be Danielle.
Okay, well, we'll reach out to Danielle, get an intro from you and reach out to her and see if we can bring her on the show to have a chat around that.
Sounds great. Fantastic.
Thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today, Veronica. I've really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed digging into how Retub was developed, how it came about, all your process of getting feedback and refining the product with that feedback, and also the pivots that you did around COVID and the impact that it had on the cafes in particular that were sort of key stakeholders in the whole business model that you've developed. So thanks so much for all of that. A really inspiring story, and I really enjoyed it. I wish you all the best for the future, and yeah, let's stay in touch.
Thank you. Yeah, please do. It's been really fun. So yeah, thank you for having me, and absolutely, I'd love to stay in touch.
I hope you enjoyed that wonderfully informative conversation with Veronica and took something away from what she shared with us today. I love how Veronica took an idea, shared the concept with friends and family, then tested with cafe owners, the people who were the key stakeholders in her product, to refine and adapt the product to what it is today. I'm curious to know what you took away from Veronica's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Veronica Shannon. That is VERONICA Shannon, all lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Veronica Shannon. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Veronica there, as well as links to the Retub website, to Veronica's social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in our conversation today. Now, if you got value from this episode, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it with at least 2 other people that it will help. Tag me in on that share and I'm going to reach out to you with a special surprise thank you gift. Veronica suggested that we have a conversation with Danielle Goodwin, founder and owner of Hawkeye Vintage, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Danielle, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Veronica Shannon. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got yet more fantastic guests lined up, including play and game consultant Alia Sandovar and Oleg Lohid of Overcoming Odds. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.